It began with thunder that felt biblical, the kind that rolls through your chest before you ever hear it. Rain fell in violent sheets across the English countryside, erasing the line between sky and earth. By midnight, every field was a shallow sea. Every tree bent like it was begging for mercy. In the distance, a church bell swung wildly, clanging without rhythm. Inside that sound, somewhere in the blackness of the storm, came the crunch of boots. Not British. Heavier, slower, foreign, German. 6 soldiers, drenched to the bone, stumbled through the mud like ghosts from a collapsing empire. Their uniforms clung to them like regret. They had been separated from their unit after an ambush near Dover. Cut off, lost, hunted. Now the wind howled like artillery, and even the war itself seemed to fade beneath the power of nature. When they saw the small church, stone walls, crooked cross, a flicker of candlelight inside, they hesitated. For men branded as invaders, it looked almost holy. But the cold didn't care about sides, nor did hunger, nor the storm. They pushed the heavy doors open, expecting shouts or gunfire. Instead, silence, a faint warmth from the altar, the smell of wet wood and burning wax, and a single man, an old priest, thin as the candle he held. His eyes flicked to their rifles, then to their faces. He said nothing. One of the Germans lowered his weapon first, then another. The door closed behind them, sealing the storm outside. For the first time in weeks, the men could hear their own breathing, and in that quiet, between fear and faith, began one of the strangest nights of the war. The year was 1944. Britain stood wounded yet unbroken. Across its fields, the war had left invisible scars. Bomb craters turned into ponds, hedgerows hiding rusting helmets, churches turned into shelters and graves. The war was everywhere and nowhere at once. The storm that night was not the only one raging over England. Above the clouds, the Luftwaffe still prowled, though with fewer wings than before. Hitler's armies were crumbling in France, and yet scattered remnants still roamed the edges of occupied Europe. Men without orders, wandering like ghosts of a dying empire. These 6 German soldiers were part of a unit that never made it home. Their commander was dead, their radio destroyed. The youngest among them, barely 19, carried his brother's dog tags around his neck because no one knew where the brother had fallen. Their sergeant, a man named Ernst Keller, had seen the inside of too many winters to still believe in victory. What drove them now was not ideology or duty, but something far simpler: survival. The English countryside they crossed was both haunting and alive. Abandoned cottages leaned like tired men. Roads vanished beneath water. Every farmhouse window looked like an eye refusing to open. They had walked 3 nights without rest, stealing bread, hiding in barns, speaking in whispers. The storm found them when their strength could go no further. When they entered the church, they expected nothing but a dry corner. Instead, they found Father Thomas Wren, the parish priest of St. Edmunds, a man who had already buried more sons than sermons that year. His village had been evacuated months ago after nearby shelling. He remained behind, he said, because someone had to keep the bell from falling silent. He watched the soldiers in silence as they took off their soaked coats, water pooling on the stone floor. They were armed but exhausted, hollowed out by hunger and guilt. One of them crossed himself instinctively before sitting down, an odd act for a soldier branded an enemy. The priest noticed but said nothing. Ernst Keller spoke first in broken English. "We need no trouble, only storm shelter." His voice was steady but careful, like a man who had rehearsed these words in fear. Father Wren nodded slowly. "Then you'll find none here," he said, and turned back toward the altar. Hours passed with only the sound of rain hammering the roof. The priest lit candles, offered bread, stale but blessed by kindness. The men accepted without a word. For a moment nationality dissolved, replaced by something older, human weariness. Yet beneath that silence, tension breathed like a second presence in the room. Every man knew that if British soldiers arrived, they'd be shot or taken prisoner. The church offered no escape, only delay. Still they stayed, drawn not by faith, but by the fragile safety it promised. Father Wren saw them not as invaders, but as lost children. He tended their wounds with rags soaked in warm water, said quiet prayers in Latin they didn't understand. In the flickering candlelight, he saw fear in their eyes, the same kind he had seen in British soldiers who passed through weeks earlier. War had turned men into mirrors of each other. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the stained glass windows. Christ on the cross, Mary weeping, angels with broken halos. Inside, 6 strangers and an old priest shared the same uncertain night, their shadows dancing across the walls like history repeating itself. No one slept. No one spoke of home. The storm outside seemed endless, but so did the war. By dawn, the candles had nearly burned out. The priest whispered, "The sun will rise soon. Storms always end." Ernst looked up from the floor, his eyes heavy with both hope and disbelief. "Do they?" he asked softly. Father Wren didn't answer. He only looked toward the door, as if he already knew that when it opened again, the war would come with it. The storm raged through the night, but inside St. Edmund's, a different kind of storm had begun. Quieter, heavier. By morning, the rain softened into mist, and the world outside was a blurred watercolor of gray and green. The soldiers sat near the altar, their rifles stacked in a neat pile, steam rising from their damp uniforms. They looked less like warriors and more like penitents waiting for judgment. Father Wren prepared a small pot of tea from the last of his supplies. The act was simple, domestic, absurd almost against the background of war. Yet when he placed the cracked mugs in front of them, the soldiers accepted as though it were a sacred ritual. None spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of the kettle and the priest's steady breath. For a moment it seemed as if the church had become a place outside of time, a pocket of peace carved out of chaos. But time, like war, never really stops. The youngest soldier, Matthias, sat near the door watching the light creep across the floor. He was barely out of boyhood, his cheeks hollow from hunger. He whispered something in German, a prayer or a memory, and pulled from his pocket a small photograph, a woman holding a child. He traced the edges of it with his thumb over and over, as if that simple act might bring him home. Father Wren saw and approached quietly. "Your wife?" he asked. Matthias looked startled, then nodded. "And son," he replied in halting English. "Born last year. He does not know me." The priest smiled faintly. "War steals time," he said, "but it never owns it." Before Matthias could answer, the door creaked open. Not from wind this time, but from a hand. Everyone froze. A British uniform stood framed in the doorway. Corporal James Alden, a local patrolman, his rifle slung over his shoulder, soaked from the storm. He had been searching the area for enemy stragglers after reports of a German group spotted near the coast. His eyes narrowed at the sight before him. 6 Germans, resting in the very heart of his village's church. "What in God's name?" he muttered. His hand went for the rifle. Ernst Keller rose first. "No fight," he said quickly. "We surrender. Only storm." The corporal hesitated, torn between duty and disbelief. The German stood, hands raised, faces gaunt, weapons untouched in the corner. Father Wren stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the rifle's barrel. "They sought shelter, nothing more," he said firmly. Alden's voice hardened. "They're the enemy, Father. You're harboring them." "They're men," the priest replied. "And last night, the storm was the only enemy we had." The room thickened with silence. Alden's jaw tightened. He had lost his brother in Normandy, killed by men wearing the same gray coats, now dripping water on the church floor. He could still hear his mother's sobs the day the telegram arrived. Now here they stood, flesh and breath, trembling before him. He raised his rifle higher. One movement, one twitch, and the fragile peace would vanish. But it was Matthias who broke the stillness. Slowly he took the photograph from his pocket and held it out with both hands. His voice trembled. "My son," he said. "He is 1 year." The corporal stared at it, a woman smiling, a baby reaching toward the camera. A family that looked like any other. He didn't take the photo, but his fingers relaxed. Father Wren spoke softly. "We all pray for our sons to come home. These men will too, if God allows." The corporal lowered his weapon, but the fire in his eyes didn't fade. "They'll answer to command," he said. "You can't hide them." "I'm not hiding them," Wren answered. "I'm giving them a place to be human, for one night more." Alden said nothing. He turned toward the door. "The patrol comes through again at dusk," he warned. "By then, they'd better be gone." The priest nodded. "They will be." The door shut. The silence returned. Ernst let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "He will come back," he said in German. "Yes," Father Wren replied, understanding enough of the tone if not the words. "That's what men do." The soldiers knew their time was running out. As evening approached, the storm began to return, softer but insistent. They packed their things silently, faces drawn and pale. Matthias lingered by the altar, staring at the flickering candle. "Why you help us?" he asked. Father Wren looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because I once blessed a young man before he went to war. He never came back. His name was Thomas, too. My son." Matthias lowered his gaze. There were no more words to offer. The church smelled of wax and wet stone. The storm pressed against the windows, whispering like a restless memory. When darkness fell again, the men were ready to leave. They had decided to move north, away from the coast, toward the woods, maybe to surrender, maybe to vanish. Ernst thanked the priest quietly. "If there is heaven, Father," he said, "I hope it looks like your church." But heaven would have to wait, because outside, just beyond the walls, fate was waiting, wearing a British uniform and holding an order that would change the night forever. The rain returned just as the church bell struck 9. It was softer now, but relentless, as if the heavens refused to let the land rest. Inside St. Edmund's, the candles had burned low, throwing long, uneasy shadows across the pews. The German soldiers stood near the door preparing to leave before the British patrol returned. Their faces were drawn thin by exhaustion and uncertainty. Father Wren stood beside the altar, silent, his hands folded around the small wooden cross that had belonged to his son. The church, once a refuge, felt suddenly fragile, a heartbeat away from breaking. Outside, through the streaked glass, a lantern's glow appeared. Then another. Bootsteps crunched on the wet gravel. Voices, English, sharp, commanding. The patrol had come sooner than expected. Ernst Keller turned to his men. "Out the back," he whispered. "Go." But Father Wren stepped forward. "There's no time. They'll see you in the yard." The men froze. The first knock came like a gunshot against the wooden door. "Open up, British Army Patrol." Father Wren's eyes flicked toward the rifles stacked by the wall. The proof of everything. For a heartbeat, his thoughts were of his son, of the telegram, of the mothers who prayed for mercy and never received it. He made a choice. He turned to Ernst. "Into the cellar. Quickly." Ernst hesitated. "You'll be shot for this." "Better me than 6 more boys," the priest said. The soldiers vanished down the narrow stairs beneath the altar, into the darkness that smelled of damp earth and candle wax. The door above them shut with a soft click, just as the church door swung open. Corporal Alden entered first, lantern in hand, followed by 2 soldiers. Rain dripped from their coats, pooling on the stone. "You knew we'd come back," Alden said coldly. "I did," Father Wren replied. "Then you know why we're here." The corporal's gaze swept the room, sharp and searching. His boots echoed as he crossed to the altar. The rifles were gone, the pews empty. Only the priest stood there, steady and unafraid. "Where are they?" Alden demanded. Father Wren did not blink. "Gone before the storm ended." "Gone where?" "East, maybe. Toward the coast." The corporal studied his face. Calm, unreadable. He wanted to believe the lie, but grief had sharpened his instincts. He walked toward the rear of the church, where the floorboards creaked faintly above the hidden cellar. Father Wren stepped forward, blocking the way. "You'll find only the bones of old parishioners down there," he said. Alden stopped. The flame of the lantern wavered between them, painting their faces in gold and shadow. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Alden lowered his weapon. "If I find you've lied," he said, "they won't bury you in holy ground." "Then I'll make my peace with God before you make yours," the priest replied softly. The patrol searched the perimeter, boots echoing through the aisles, hands brushing the cold stone walls. But the storm outside had drowned all tracks, erased all trails. After 10 tense minutes, Alden signaled to his men. "Nothing here." They left without another word. The door shut. Silence returned, heavier than before. Father Wren waited. Only when the lantern light disappeared down the lane did he open the cellar door. The 6 soldiers emerged one by one, pale, shaken, eyes wide with gratitude and disbelief. Matthias was last. He stopped before the priest and tried to speak, but no words came. His lips trembled, tears mixed with the grime on his face. He dropped to his knees and kissed the old man's hand. Ernst placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and turned to the priest. "If we live," he said, "we'll never forget." Father Wren nodded. "If you live," he answered, "remember that mercy isn't weakness. It's the only thing stronger than war." Outside, the storm began to break. The clouds thinned, letting pale moonlight spill over the churchyard. It was time. They left through the rear gate, silent shadows slipping into the fog. Father Wren watched them vanish beyond the gravestones, their footsteps swallowed by the wet earth. For a long while he remained standing in the doorway, his face lifted to the clearing sky. The rain had stopped, but his eyes glistened as though it hadn't. Behind him, the church stood empty, a sanctuary that had held both enemies and angels in the same breath. When he finally returned inside, the candle by the altar had gone out. He didn't relight it. He simply whispered, "Thomas, if you can hear me, I did what you would have wanted." Then he knelt, head bowed, and waited for the dawn. The morning came gently, as if the world itself were apologizing for the night before. The sky was pale gold, the kind that stretches across the hills like forgiveness. St. Edmund's stood quiet, its walls glistening with dew instead of rain. The bell rope swayed softly in the breeze, but no one rang it. Father Wren stepped outside and looked toward the distant fields. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke, the 2 scents that had defined the decade. Somewhere far away, guns still thundered. But here, in this small, forgotten corner of England, peace had stolen a few hours from history. He thought of the 6 men now moving through the countryside, hunted again, yet carrying something the war could never issue, a moment of grace. He wondered whether they would make it to safety or vanish like so many before them. The thought brought no comfort, only a quiet acceptance. Mercy did not promise survival. It only proved that humanity hadn't drowned yet. That afternoon, Corporal Alden returned alone. He entered the church with his cap in his hands. The rifle was gone. The anger, too. "They got away," he said flatly. Father Wren nodded. "Yes." Alden looked around the empty pews, the faint smell of candle smoke still in the air. "You lied to me." "I did," the priest said, "but not to God." The corporal studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I used to come here as a boy. My brother sang in that choir loft." His eyes flicked to the altar. "He died last year in France, shot by men who spoke their tongue." "I'm sorry," Father Wren whispered. Alden nodded, though his jaw tightened. "You should be careful, Father. Not everyone would understand what you did." "I don't expect them to," he replied. "Understanding isn't salvation, but sometimes it's the first step toward it." The corporal turned to leave. At the door he paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you kept something alive here. I'm not sure what to call it. Faith, maybe." "Call it what you like," the priest answered. "Just don't let it die." When Alden walked away, his boots left no prints in the soft ground. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the church in a pale glow that made the old stones look almost new. Weeks later, as the war drew toward its end, Father Wren would receive word that several German prisoners had been captured near the northern coast, one of them carrying a photograph of a woman and a child. On the back, scrawled in shaky English, were 3 words. "Thank you, Father." He kept the photo beside his son's cross on the altar. No one in the parish ever asked where it came from, and he never told them. Years passed. The war ended, rebuilt, was remembered and retold. But in St. Edmund's the story remained unspoken, a secret shared only by the stones and the silence. Sometimes, when storms rolled again across the countryside, villagers swore they heard the faint toll of a bell even when no one was inside. A reminder, perhaps, that mercy once lived here and refused to die. In the end, history would forget the names of the 6 soldiers, the priest, even the corporal. But what endured was the simple truth born that night, that beneath the thunder of nations and the flags of men, kindness still found room to breathe. And in the silence that followed, the church remembered everything.